With artificial intelligence advancing at just a breakneck pace, the idea of a universal basic income, or UBI, has gone from being a fringe idea to something we're all talking about. It's a huge topic, and it really gets to the heart of some big questions we have about the future of work and, well, our whole society.
A lot of people see it as the inevitable answer to mass automation. But, okay, beyond the headlines, what are the actual economics here? How would a country even begin to implement a UBI? That's exactly what we're going to break down right now.
And to get started, let's just completely reframe this conversation with this quote from economist Ollie Sharp. The number one objection you always hear is, how could we possibly afford it? But what if that's the wrong question entirely? What if the real challenge isn't finding the money, but managing the effects of that money?
All right, let's really get into this, because this one shift in thinking, it's honestly the key to understanding the entire UBI debate.
First things first, we have to rethink how we even talk about the cost of a program like UBI. And this gets right to the core of how a modern government's finances actually work. So you've probably heard this a million times, right? The common view is that a government's budget is just like ours, like a household budget. It has to earn money through taxes before it can spend it. But a different school of thought, called modern monetary theory, or MMT, says that for a country that issues its own currency, that's not how it works at all.
And to make this super intuitive, our source Ollie Sharp uses this absolutely brilliant analogy. Just picture the entire economy as one giant sandpit.
Okay, so the economy, that's our sandpit. And all the money flowing through it, that's the sand. And as you can probably imagine, the sand isn't spread out very evenly. Some people have these huge piles, massive sandcastles, while other parts of the pit are almost completely bare. Now, the traditional view of economics says that if the government wants to help someone over in an empty corner, it has to first go to one of those big piles, scoop up some sand, that's taxes, and then lug it over the other side. It's a simple transfer. But here's the big twist from MMT. A government that controls its own currency, think the US dollar, the British pound, they essentially have a sand-making machine. They can create new money, new sand, pretty much out of thin air, and sprinkle it wherever it's needed. Okay. And this is where it gets really interesting, because this reveals the real limit. The danger isn't that you'll run out of sand. No way. The real danger is that the sand-making machine goes nuts and the whole sand pit overflows. And that overflow, that's inflation. So in this view, the main job of taxes isn't to pay for stuff, it's to remove excess sand from the pit to keep it from overflowing. And this all brings us right back to UBI. If you buy into this framework, then UBI is like setting up a sprinkler system for the sand pit, making sure everyone gets a little bit of sand to work with. The challenge isn't finding sand to put in the sprinkler. The challenge is setting the flow rate just right so you don't cause that inflationary overflow.
So if the main risk here isn't about affording it, but about inflation and, messing up the economy, what happens when we actually try to model it out? Because this is where things get really interesting. Economists have wildly different predictions.
Right. So if we turn on that UBI sand sprinkler, what happens? Do we get a booming economy or just a big economic mess? Well, it turns out it all depends on the assumptions you bake into your economic model. Let's look at two big ones.
On one hand, you've got this Keynesian model from the Roosevelt Institute. It's all about demand. It assumes there's some slack in the economy, unused resources. So you give people money, they go out and spend it, and boom, the economy grows. But then, on the other hand, you've got this Iagari general equilibrium model, and it's focused on trade-offs. It basically says, hold on, the taxes you need to fund this thing, they're going to discourage people from working and saving, and that ultimately shrinks the whole pie. And when I say the predictions are different, I mean they are worlds apart. The Roosevelt Institute model, it projects that a debt-financed UBI of $1,000 a month would grow the U.S. economy by a jaw-dropping 12.56% in just 8 years. Whoa, but hold on. Now look at the flip side. That Iagari model predicts that a similar UBI, paid for with income tax, would actually cause the economy's output to fall by 12%. That's a nearly 25-point difference between the two predictions. It just goes to show you how much the core assumptions really matter. Okay, so the Iagari paper brings up this really important alternative idea. It's called the negative income tax, or NIT. And instead of giving everybody a check and then trying to tax it back from the wealthy, an NIT just streamlines the whole thing. If you're below a certain income, you get money from the government. If you're above it, you pay taxes. Simple as that. Really, the difference here is all about the plumbing, the mechanics of it. Think about it. A UBI gives everyone $1,000.
And then maybe it taxes a high earner $1,500, so they're down a net $500. An NIT just says, forget the back and forth, and taxes that person $500 straight up. The end result for that person is identical, but the total amount of cash the government has to move around is way, way smaller. And this really hammers home the efficiency argument. That same Iagari model, it finds that you could get almost all the same benefits with an optimal NIT that would only require a budget of about 2.3% of GDP. I mean, that is a tiny fraction of what a full-blown UBI program would cost.
All right, so that's the theory, and those are the models. But does anything like this actually exist in the real world? Well, yes, it does. And for that, we have to head up north to Alaska.
So check this out. Since way back in 1982, Alaska's permanent fund, which is fueled by state oil money, has paid a dividend every single year to almost every resident. As you can see right here, the amount bounces around, but it's been a steady, no-strings-attached cash payment for decades. This is pretty much the best real-world UBI experiment we've got. So, what happened? Well, studies looking at the job market found some really interesting things. For one, there was an increase in people working part-time, but the total number of hours worked across the state dipped a little bit. And maybe most fascinating, researchers saw a shift in the kinds of jobs people were doing, less mechanical stuff and more jobs that required social and analytical skills.
But, and this is a huge but, before we all run out and draw some massive conclusion from this, we have to pump the brakes. This quote from researcher Michelle Cafasso really gets to the heart of the problem. Alaska is, well, it's Alaska. It's unique. It's almost impossible to find a perfect control group to compare it to. And that means we really have to be skeptical about making any definitive claims about the fund's effects. And that really brings us to the big takeaway here. After looking at the theories, the clashing models, and the messy real-world evidence, it seems like the whole UBI debate isn't actually about if we can afford it. The real question, the deeper question, is about what kind of economy we want to design. What trade-offs are we willing to make? Do we want to prioritize growing the economy or worry more about how taxes affect things? How do we value a safety net versus traditional incentives for work? Those are the real questions at the heart of the entire UBI conversation.